Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for December the 22nd, 2022. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Greetings, Mark. I'm Peter Ryan and I am in Montreal just preparing for the Christmas season.
Well, absolutely. I'm getting ready for Christmas here. I've just moved home earlier this month, so it's really feeling like it would just be good to not be traveling, just be home, not actually have the chaos of a house move going on. And of course, my daughter was born this year, so it's her first Christmas at home.
That's right. So it's a very special year for you. Congratulations, and onward and upward into 2023.
Well, absolutely. On this episode, what we decided to do was just you and I have a chat because normally we always interview a guest and we never get a chance to sort of talk about the interviews that we've done. So I thought that it would be a good idea to maybe look back, maybe a couple of personal observations about what you really enjoyed about 2022, and then maybe some ideas from the pod itself. So I guess, in terms of, personal or business or whatever, what some of your standout points from 2022?
For me, probably the biggest standout was the return to business travel in the CX industry, whereas I think for the majority of 2020 and certainly almost all of 2021, most of us were locked down and really under lock and key. Something that I observed was the extent to which people in our industry wanted to get back on the road. Now, it's an interesting dynamic considering that by the end of 2019, I will tell you personally, I was burned out from travel. I look at the schedule that I undertook over the course of 2019, and I still don't know how I did it. And I think, Mark, you were very much in a similar position, as were many people in our space. And something that I really missed was being on the road, being able to get out, see different locations, to visit with different executives, many of whom have become friends over the course of my career, and to really also have the opportunity to participate in a lot of very cutting edge conferences and events that were taking place. There's a desire on the part of people to get back out, to be social, and to learn in person as opposed to doing it over the Zoom screen or the Teams screen. And for me, I would say probably that was the biggest standout that I would be able to identify.
Yeah, the first thing that I wrote down when I was thinking about what to say was "we can travel again." So it was exactly the same point, and it's surprising because I think I felt similarly to you at the end of 2019, because I actually vowed to have 3 months of no travel at the beginning of 2020, which exactly kind of coincided with the pandemic arriving in March.
Yeah.
So 2020, I didn't travel at all because I had my downtime. I was expecting, my first trip was booked to California at the end of March, and of course that never happened, and all of the other trips I had booked for 2020 never happened. The first trip I had booked was Christmas 21, when I was going to go to see my family, and that was going to be my first trip since the pandemic. But I had a complete disaster because I had my vaccine certificates in Portuguese from Brazil.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried checking in, and British Airways said we only accept English. And unfortunately, for those few days around the time I was traveling, the Brazilian health service had been hacked, and so none of their systems were available. So I couldn't get my English certificate. So I just couldn't travel. The entire holiday was completely ruined. So yeah, the first time I went back after the pandemic was when I saw you in London in the end of February, early March. And we've seen each other a couple of times in London this year. And I think that's one of the big differences now, is that we can kind of try to coincide travel and make sure we're at the same conferences at the same time and stuff. And, I think that's definitely one of the biggest differences.
No question about it. And, as I talk with a lot of our contemporaries in the CX space, the opportunity to travel to close locations, to far off locations, is something that everyone's taking advantage of. And I think that we're all going to have to watch ourselves to make sure that we don't burn out on travel again. It's great to be able to hop on a plane. It's great to be able to go to some exotic destinations, but we also have to be wary of our own health. And that's something else that I've noticed within the space, the extent to which people are prioritizing their physical and mental health The fact is too, when it came to the pandemic, whereas we might have been burned out on travel before, a lot of people in the CX industry, whether it's at the executive level all the way down to the front lines, were finding themselves burning out. That there was this idea that if you were going to be working remotely, that it wasn't just working your regular hours, it was constant work. And we as a society, and certainly as an industry, I think have realized that we can't continue with that. And for that reason, probably another big standout for me is the extent to which we're seeing both outsourcing operators as well as captive players looking to ensure a good work-life balance and to make sure that mental health is a priority amongst all team members.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've seen people paying lip service to this in the past, but during the pandemic, there was a real need to not only create a flexible working environment that really allowed people to balance family responsibilities with work, but at the same time, there was a lot of people suffering isolation at home. Especially if you live alone and you're working alone at home and your opportunities to socialize were extremely minimal with everything closed. So you started seeing companies really starting to take subjects like mental health much more seriously than ever before. So I think that, this is another positive outcome of the kind of car crash that was the pandemic. We've seen so many people dying from this virus and so much disruption. But on the flip side, we can certainly see that we are going to see an expectation of more family-friendly, flexible working policies in future.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And Mark, if I'm thinking about another factor in 2022 that I thought was interesting, or I thought that was a real standout. We have talked about this in previous podcasts, both you and I and with our guests. It was this issue about labor force and the extent to which that the CX industry has been suffering, as have many sectors, from a lack of availability of talented labor that's willing to come in either in center or to work from home in a frontline capacity. Now, there is no easy fix for this. And depending on who you talk to, there are varying degrees of optimism versus pessimism. But I think there's one thing that we can be fairly certain of. 2022 was a very, very tough time for recruiters. It was a very tough time for operators who were looking to retain good talent. And if I'm blunt with you, I don't think 2023 is going to be all that different.
Yes, probably not. Although you can also flip that around and say that for the executives and companies that understand this, there is an opportunity to stand out, to offer the kind of flexibility that people are now insisting on as default. Instead of the kind of games we always used to get when, during the recruitment process, over your package and over the hours you're expected to work and that. I mean, if companies come along and start being a lot more flexible or in the arrangements that they're offering and much more helpful, then I think that they would actually become employers of choice.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the question I've got is, we know what needs to be done. How many operators, whether it's outsourcers or captives, are actually going to do it? That's the big question.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any sort of standout episodes at all during this year that you sort of thought where, there was really some great insight? Because I was thinking about this, and I think I noted down about half a dozen or so that I really thought gave some really good insights.
I loved all the episodes that we recorded. Probably for me, there were a couple. Right off the top, I would say the discussion that I had with our fellow CX podcasters most recently was definitely a standout, not just from the content, but from the fact that we were able to assemble such an interesting and talented group of people to chat a little bit about what was going on in the industry and to get different views. People from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from Central and Eastern Europe. that was really quite something as far as I was concerned. Equally speaking, I would say that the discussions that were undertaken around fraud prevention and data security with Rick Collins that came out of the back of a conference I attended in New York in September, that was also one that I thought was quite something, and really it shone some light on a lot of different elements that everybody in our industry can appreciate. And to be clear, Rick doesn't come from our sector, but he also has a deep enough view about data protection and what can be done to ensure that the industry he works in, which is insurance, it can be parlayed over to what we're doing in CX, and some great best practices. I'd also just call out as well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, the interview I did with Ben Jones to talk a little bit about how he found the CX Outsourcers event that he attended in Las Vegas, which took place in September of this year. CX Outsourcers was put on hold, Mark, as you know, due to the COVID period, and it came back with a vengeance, was a great success. And to find out from one of the delegates about what they were able to take away and what they can put into practice, to me really stood out as something that was very validating and also very informative.
And I know that you've been planning CX Outsourcers for 2023. So do you have any sort of public information you can share on that?
Watch this space. I can give you a little bit more information, a little bit more detail into what 2023 is going to look like. But I would just counsel all of our listeners that we can anticipate it will probably be occurring at the end of H1. And if you're living in the Americas, plan for an overseas trip.
Okay, so we can hopefully guess which continent is going to be on then, but we'll all try to be around. I was just thinking, when we said that we were going to have this chat about some of the best episodes this year and some of the trends that we really observed, and I made a note of a few episodes that I think really stood out, and I think that the first episode of the year was interesting because we had the CX boss of Uber, Lisa Stoner. And she gave us a lot of ideas about innovation. How do you work for such an innovative company that's constantly changing and is global, but you've got to keep the day-to-day CX running at the same time? And then I thought Steve Loynd. We actually had Steve on the show twice this year, and I kind of forgot about that because I know that recently we had him talking about the metaverse, and he had some. I mean, it's typical with Steve anyway that he really is a deep thinker, and he's a good friend of both of ours anyway. But when we get him on, he definitely does his research and he does a lot of thinking. And instead of the typical kind of metaverse story around, well, this is the future of CX, he definitely gave us some real views on where this might be going and how it might change customer interactions. And right early in the year, he talked about the Great Resignation as well. And I think, just as you were saying, this is, although we may not be talking about it as the Great Resignation anymore, we're definitely talking about labor shortages and expectations as one of the big issues right now.
Yeah, Steve's always ahead of the curve when it comes to what we should be anticipating, which is why I think that when you look at the work he's done recently on the metaverse and what he's been publishing and what he's been talking about, everybody should take note. He really is somebody who is a true futurist in our space. And talking about trends, Mark, as I was thinking about the episodes that we were recording, something that's come up in the CX industry, rightly so, is ESG. And the extent to which companies are prioritizing this. Buyers are prioritizing it when they're looking for outsourcers. Outsourcers are prioritizing it in terms of their own planning. And a standout episode I would like to call out was the one that I did with Katya Yakaman and Alexandra Fuss, talking about what it was like as a woman executive or as a woman who has been able to work their way up in the CX industry to a leadership position. Both of them are incredibly bright and very successful in what they do in the CX space, and are truly our credit to what's happening in regards to the empowerment of women and making sure that there's much more of a gender equity balance in terms of what the boardrooms look like. And, I go back to what I said on that episode in the introduction. When I first got into this game, if you were ever invited to go visit a CX organization, whether it was technology or an outsourcer, you would walk into a boardroom of a bunch of middle-aged men, people who, well, the demographic you and I fall into now. There's a lot more progress happening in this regard in terms of being able to try and make sure that more female executives, more female talent have a seat at the decision-making table. And I think that was really brought out with the discussion with both Alexandra and Katya.
Yeah, absolutely. And also this year on that subject, we had Hemant Puthli, who's the director at Neo Group, and he'd just actually done some research. Neo Group had published a big study on ESG where they'd surveyed all the big IT and BPO companies, and I think, to be honest, they found that a lot of people are just box ticking still. They found that there was a lot of people that had a presentation saying, here's what we're doing on ESG. But when you actually kind of started studying the culture of the organization, it hadn't kind of flowed downwards. So that was definitely interesting to observe. And on your last point, I actually, the next person I had listed here was Paula Kennedy Garcia, talking about trust and safety. And I think trust and safety has exploded this year. It's become such an important issue. And I think that one of the questions is, should customer service or CX companies actually be performing trust and safety functions? It seems that all of the companies we talk to, all the big BPOs, they are offering a trust and safety service, but it seems to be such a specialized type of service that has nothing to do with the typical kind of contact center agent working with customers that I don't know, maybe there will be specialized players in future in this area, or maybe we will see spin outs or something from the CX giants,
Highly possible. And Mark, I'll just identify one last series of episodes that we touched on, and that related to coaching and training. We were fortunate enough over the course of 2022 to be able to interview a couple of experts in this domain, Jackie Turner, who is based in the UK, and Nadia Pace, who's based in Malta. And they were able to give some great insight in terms of what organizations have to think about when they're looking to try and ensure that they're upskilling people to be able to handle frontline interactions, whether it's digital or voice. It's not a case of just throwing people into a classroom and deluging them with PowerPoint slides about a product or service they're going to be supporting, or a piece of software that they're going to be managing as agents. There's a lot more to it. And if we're going to be able to retain the best talent, coaching and training has got to be a big part of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, just as we're sort of wrapping up here, I just wanted to mention another couple of podcasts that we did during the year, because I think the thing is that we could just draw up a long list. But I think that, as you look, and we consistently put one out every single week, even during the quiet summer period, even during the Christmas period. And what you'll see is that we're covering so many different subjects from the perspective of the buyers, the analysts, the BPOs. I think that, a good example was Paul O'Hara from Teleperformance, where he was talking about how we can move on from the old kind of full-time equivalent model, which is what we've seen for so many years, people pricing customer service projects in terms of how many people are in a contact center, rather than what is the value you can actually provide, and what is the improvement to the customer experience that can be created. And I think that Tony Wan was a great one as well. Tony was over in South Korea, and he was talking about gaming CX, like player experience. And I think that it's very interesting to look at an industry where your customers are actually fans. They're not just customers handing over their cash. They're customers that are handing over cash and also their free time. They might be spending their entire weekend with your product. And how does that change the dynamic of the relationship between, your brand and how you treat that customer?
No, very true. And some excellent points that were made on both those discussions with Tony and with Paul. And, Mark, you mentioned the point that, as you say, we publish an episode every single week. Something I would just like to call out that our listeners don't realize is the fact that you are really the technical producer of this. The amount of time that you spend putting into editing, in terms of publishing and managing the analytics, is just tremendous. I mean, I'm just a humble talker, a humble co-host here, but you put in a tremendous amount of work, and for that, let me just say I'm incredibly grateful.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, you know, you're also bringing in some fantastic guests, and I'm sure that we will announce some great ones as we move into 2023. But for now, I guess we're a couple of days away from Christmas. So have you got any festive messages for the listeners?
Just that I hope everybody has a great holiday season. 2022 has been a fantastic year. I think that the previous 2 years have challenged us tremendously, no matter where we were in the world. And it's been great to see people live. I'm looking forward to seeing more people in person going into the coming 12 months, and just have a great period off.
Absolutely. I'd echo that. Definitely. Everyone have a great holiday season. We'll see you all on the other side in 2023. I'm certainly already planning some trips to the US and to Europe. And so, you know, I can see that going from 2022 being a kind of transition back to normality, hopefully we will have a year of normality next year.
Let's keep our fingers crossed. But in the meantime, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, just happy holidays to everybody.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week. Okay, cool.
Excellent. Yeah. That was outstanding.